Welcome to Time for Forgiveness, where we explore real stories.
Real stories that will transform your life through the power of forgiveness. We have a very compelling episode for you today. Kelly and I are really excited to introduce you to Doug Dane. Doug, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be
Absolutely.
here.
No, it's great to have you. And we're going to go 30, this is 30 minutes of compelling story from Doug about his life. We're going to drill into a specific time frame, I think, Doug, and let Kelly kind of kick this off. I'll turn it over to you, honey.
Great. For all our listeners, I just finished Doug's book on mistaken identity, and I recommend everyone get this book. It's a read beyond what I thought it was about, and I learned so much. But I'd like to start here. I'd like to read kind of a paragraph from your story. Before I was born, I was set up for abuse. In the many situations of abuse that were part of my life, who was responsible? My adoptive parents, the child welfare system, the police, or was it just me? The last question, unfortunately, is what the child internalizes. Like other victims, I took on the blame and the shame. Therein lies the crux of my story. Shame became my most constant companion. And I would guess that there's probably a lot of listeners right now that can relate to what you're saying regarding this shame companion. But I wanted to turn it over to you and just maybe kind of give an example, kind of draw a picture of what that looked like living with shame as your constant companion.
Well, let's start with physically. Sweaty palms a lot, very uncomfortable around people, stomach problems, skin problems, a lot of physical manifestation, obviously, of what they call it toxic stress is what you pick up through these adverse experiences. Self-loathing, second guessing. Literally, I remember a period of my life where, just like now, I'd speak and I'd say something, and then I would, pass the conversation back to you. And while you're speaking, I'm running through my head what I just said. How did it sound? Should I have said something different? So a lot of inner dialogue, which obviously would result, of course, in a lot of confusion. So I was very, 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 very confused, and just really just didn't like myself.
And Doug, can you share
yes.
with the audience a little bit about your book? It chronicles your story of abuse and just a lot of things that you went through in your life that you were able to put in this book. And we just really appreciate your heart and being able to share this with the world. But can you help the audience understand a little bit more about your story so that they can kind of connect the dots here?
Yeah, I'll try to give you Cole's notes. So, adopted at 6 months, given up as a newborn to foster care from my birth mom. My birth mom had 6 different children with 4 different men, so of course she had a heck of a story. I was the 5th to be given up, and then 6 months later, I landed in this very violent, alcoholic home. Parents knew, friends knew, family knew, neighbors knew. But back then, it was a much different world than it is now in terms of selection and all that. And then, literally, it's just this very, very violent childhood. 2 very violent, abusive, broken adults that were beating each other and mistreating themselves. And that was really the first part of my life. And so for the first 13 years, it was either early on, it was my dad, very violent alcoholic. He was a war vet. He lost his brother, came home a very broken man, and became an alcoholic, which is pretty common. And so he would, a lot of beatings on my mom, of course, had girlfriends bringing them home, and it was all kinds of, it was really, really distorted. And then at 8 years old, my father gets arrested for another beating on my mom. And the deal was, if he ever wanted to see his children again, his 2 boys, he had to quit drinking, and he did, and he never drank again. But my mom ended up in the hospital at that same point. We ended up on a farm, another foster care, a Mennonite family that for the first time we were actually really taken care of and cared for. And then we ended up back home a couple months later. My dad was able to return home because he had quit drinking, but the system, social workers, the intervention, the interviews thought, well, this is a good idea. Let's put these two people back together. My mom had gone through many, many bouts of shock treatments for her mental illness because of the beatings and the abuse. And so she came home a very dark, broken woman. And so then it flipped. And then my mom was beating the heck out of my father. So from 8 to 13, we were just, doing everything we can to just stay safe from
Survive.
our mom. Because she would be drunk from the morning till the time she passed out pretty much every day. And so we literally lived in my father's bedroom, this little tiny 3-bedroom house with a door locked, get up in the morning, go to school, come home, lock ourselves in the bedroom, wait for mom to black out, go to bed, and do that all over again. So that was till 13.
Wow.
And then, my mom left, right? I kicked my mom out of the house, called the police. They arrested her and took her away. And then, of course, I was searching for love in all the wrong places. And I was in Boy Scouts. I was hanging around this Radio Shack, this stereo store, because we were into music, me and my friend, and we were getting groomed by this ring of pedophiles. And so 13 through 15, I'm being sexually abused, being passed around these 4 different men. There was about 25 or more boys involved in this ring. That ended at 15. My kidnapping. Returned home a week later. Police show up at my door with photographs and investigations, and that of course came out. I had to go to court, and then really, I'm doing Cole's notes here, obviously, and then 15 through 23, drunk, stoned, unhealthy, unhappy, a lot of emotional problems.
Just trying to deal with all this, right?
Yeah. Listen, it's
Yeah.
very, from 0 to 17, typically we go through these adverse childhood experiences. And then, of course, all the side effects from that experience kick in.
Doug, was this investigation going on without you? Were you aware that the police were onto this at that time?
No, it's interesting because I met the detective that came to my door that night, Sunday night. I ended up meeting him when I was investigating and putting the story together. And he was telling us the reason they had put out alert on the news. I was 15, I was a minor. So it was across the Canadian news channel, CBC. And what they were doing is one of the fathers of another boy was out driving around in Kitchener with a gun, trying to find one of the other perpetrators. So I was kidnapped by one guy named Randy, and this other guy named James. There was a father out trying to hunt him down with a gun. And so they really accelerated this process. So I got home and also these police show up at my door, and I didn't know, I had no idea they were onto this. The parents didn't know. It was all very, covert, if you will, and secretive back then, for sure. So
Did you want to tell someone but didn't know who to tell, or you just felt like this was something that it's going to add to the shame that you just?
No, it was more. I was very confused. Obviously, it was a very confusing time because at that age, as a male, obviously there was a real conflict going on because physically it felt good, emotionally it felt awful.
You just knew, you knew it was wrong, right?
Yeah, I knew it was wrong right from the very, very beginning. But they were also, they were doing a great job grooming us. They had the book, The Joy of Sex, and they showed us passages that it was normal for a teenage boy to be exploring sex with another male. But the book didn't say that, I was 13 and they were 26, 27 years old, just really confused. But definitely at any age, no matter what your life is like, you are at that age pursuing answers. Who am I and what is right and what is wrong? You're trying to find your way. And when it's distorted and dark as it was, it just adds more fuel to the flames of self-loathing, but afraid. Who do you talk to? Like I had nobody to talk to. I couldn't talk to my dad. He was gone,
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's not like you had a role model or somebody that was there to be your support central. You didn't really have, sounds like you had nobody to reach out to about this, Doug.
Yeah, all I had was teachers that they saw something in me and they treated me a better way because they saw something in me. And I think that was enough to sustain me where, I didn't, end my life or anything like that. So I wouldn't have told them anything, but they saw something in me. I think that kept me going.
You had mentioned in the book, it's a sentence that I remember that you had said, while I was growing up, I felt broken inside, but it didn't break me.
Right. Yeah.
Why do you think
Yeah.
that is?
I get asked that a lot. I think, um, like I look at in the book I mentioned, I'm so grateful I got adopted into that family because I think I saved a little boy's life because another little boy might not have been able to sustain that. And statistically, I should
Okay,
be homeless.
I've got to stop you, and I need you to say what you just said again, please.
I'm so grateful that I got adopted into that home because
Hmm.
I was strong enough to survive where it might have taken another little boy's life.
Wow.
So I think I saved a little boy's life. I saved myself through the experience, and I'm better for it, but I also saved another little boy because it could have been another little boy that got adopted into that family. And I could have ended up in another family, maybe worse, maybe better. Who knows who I would be now or what I would have done in my life so far if I ended up in a different family. So I just looked to that, and that was part of the process of being forgiven was seeing the good in it.
Well, I have to give you a lot of credit, Doug, to be able to shift your perspective and look for the good. Um, because probably in some respect there wasn't an alternative.
Well, I think you spend so much time um, focusing on yourself and what's wrong with you and trying to figure out why you feel the way you feel that makes you conclude that there's something wrong with you. Um, and I think that one of the gifts I have is I call myself an earnest investigator. I've always been investigative. I was always that little boy. Why? Why? I always wanted to understand. And I think just the way I was made, I guess, with seeking understanding. Um, if you're seeking understanding, you have to look at the facts. And so I think somehow, some way, I was able to look at the facts of the situation. I suffered a lot. I mean, oh my God, the suffering in my head and my heart. But I was always pursuing, there's got to be some answer here, and I just kept searching for it and searching for it. And then I finally took way too friggin' long, but I finally found the answer that I was able to, look at this much, much differently.
And again, what was the answer for you, Doug?
Um, One of the biggest answers came through the counselor who unveiled this story because this story that's in the book and was on the news and such didn't come out until I was 40. It was all blocked out.
Mm-hmm.
She handed me a book called The Four Agreements. She said, if you want to work with me, you
Mm-hmm.
have to study this
Great
book.
book.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I really I'm a good student. I follow instructions well from others. If I trust you and I think you got my best interests at heart, I'm a great student. And so I just dove into that book and I really practiced the art of not taking anything personally. I really like how he explained about not taking things personally. And so I just fairly quickly I was able to see, why would I take all that abuse personally? It had nothing to do with me. It happened to me, but it wasn't about me.
Takes a great level of awareness, though, to look at it from that lens. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I love that you
Yeah.
said the art because it is an art. It's a choice that you're going to change your perception of how you're seeing it. You're going to look through a different lens, which isn't easy when, at some point in your life, and I know that you say, I'm not a victim, that I've taken responsibility for all parts of my life. But when you do feel like a victim at times, it's really difficult to possibly look through a different lens, to see it in a different way.
Yeah, and it's easy. People always go easier said than done. It's easier for me now to say it's not that hard. It actually is quite simple. I think what's hard is our system of support, how we react to these situations, the narrative around mental well-being. I think it's like, I'm very direct with people. I said, if you want to make it hard like I did, I wasted a long time. It doesn't have to be hard. You can do it like that. Um,
Do what,
but you have to want to.
Doug?
You have to want to.
When you say do
What's
that,
that?
what is it? What
Just
is the
change your perspective on the story.
okay? Yeah,
Um,
the
I just,
meaning. You
yeah,
change the meaning,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, well, what it also changes my identity. So
Mm-hmm.
what I realize is that when you go through these experiences, it shapes you. You start to see yourself that way. You form an identity. You form your own kind of image. Other people have an image of you. You you're trying to figure out who you are and where you belong. All that. And obviously, in my case, the adults had no clue to answer those questions for me. I mean, if I grew up in your family, you're wonderful people. I grew up as your son, and I was wondering, who am I? And Dad, what about this? What about that? You would give me some pretty good answers that I could stand on and feel comfortable in my own skin. And so it's very, very severe when you're young and you have the kind of life I had, where you lose your identity, and because you went through that, you make all these mistakes,
And
and then you feel
assumptions.
terrible. What's that?
And assumptions
Yeah.
about
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
yourself.
You make all these mistakes,
Hmm.
and then of course the public, family, whatever, they go, you feel like crap because you make these mistakes. People make you feel like crap, and you get locked into. So the trick really here is, if you can look at the story objectively and from a neutral perspective, and see that, okay, that is not because of me, it happened to me, and then the resulting mistakes were because of that. If I didn't go through that, I wouldn't do this, and I wouldn't feel lousy about myself, and I wouldn't be feeling the way I feel about myself, or treat myself or others the way that I do. So the trick is really to change your view on the story, because
Mm-hmm.
then you change your identity. But people like the victim identity too these days.
Oh yeah. Well, then you don't have to take responsibility, right? If you're the victim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my mentors said that. He said, Doug, is very convenient being a victim. And
Do
he
you want to
was
talk
right.
about that mentor at all, Doug? Are you referring to Bob Proctor?
Not in that regard. Bob had a couple other slaps across the face that he gave me early on and over the years. No, this was somebody else that had said that to me.
I want to
Okay.
go back to what you just said, because someone's listening to this right now and they're like, you don't know my story. And how can you say that? Can you repeat what you
Yeah.
said and explain it?
Well, it's very convenient to be a victim, because especially in today's world, because we really are fostering a real victim mentality, all these polarizing narratives, all this stuff. And so it's very convenient to be a victim, because you can explain away all your mistakes. You can justify them, explain them away. The fact is, you don't feel any better about yourself, but it's very useful to be a victim these days. Right. And I was the same way. So you were talking about, Bob Proctor, and Bob kept saying, Doug, you just got to let it go. I go, Bob, you don't understand. He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, you didn't go through what I went through. How could you possibly understand? I said, you don't know what you're talking about, Bob. And I was going to try to prove him wrong. I knew he was wrong and I was right. Well, I was wrong, and it's so convenient to use this as a way to explain away your own shortcomings or the mistakes that you make. And that I have no problem with people being a victim. If you want to be a victim, I don't judge people for that. I don't judge your story. But you really have to take a look in the mirror and go, how do you want to live?
Well,
And
I don't want to be a victim, and I want to live like you, and I want to let it go. But how do you do that?
well, the first thing is, you truly have to want to. You really have to really say, I am prepared to let it go. It's difficult these days, certainly, the way our system is and the tools that are out there. We don't really have a whole lot of tools to get at the root cause of our problems. We have a lot of tools to kind of just temporarily make us feel better, whether it's counseling and therapy or pills or stuff like that. But you have to have a strong desire. You really, really do. And there is a way to do it. I put a chapter in the book. It's called The Cure. There is a cure for all this. I don't think everybody's set up to do this. Because listen, people have some pretty bad stories. I mean, if you look at my story generationally, like the story that's in that book is nothing compared to the previous generation story, my parents and so on and so forth. You have to have this, you have to have a desire, and then you have to make a decision that you're going to. Um, that's the very beginning, and I think that's when you feel the way you feel about yourself, and you look at your story and you look at your life, it would be very easy to convince yourself that it's probably not possible for you. So I'm trying to walk the talk. I'm trying to show people if I did it, I found a way. I can show you how to do it. I'm working with people every day, trying to convince them that it is simple. There is a way to do it. You don't have to suffer your whole life, but you have to want to.
Yeah. And we don't control our parents or the environment we're born into. And you just have to deal with it, right? And you went through a
Yeah.
lot, Doug. I guess I didn't really know your full story till Kelly mentioned your book and we started reading your story and everything. And I'm actually really inspired by this, who you've become as a result of everything, because it could have, like you said, it could have went the other way. But we talk about finding purpose in the pain, and you've found a way to do that, and now you're turning that out into helping other people go through what they're going through. So I think it's really cool. Like, way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, obviously, we are, talking about a lot of things on this show, but one of the things that we're really focusing on is forgiveness. And there's a paragraph in your book that I'd like to read and maybe ask a question from that. You say you don't have to look at what happened to you as a bad thing. I decided if I was going to start over and I was going to change my mind, I decided it wasn't anyone's fault. Not my adoptive parents, not my birth moms, not my abusers, not anyone else. I took responsibility for my life. I put my stake in the ground and formed a new credo to live by, which is pretty powerful when I'm sitting here listening and reading that paragraph. But you took it even a step further. And I just want you to talk about that. In your book, you share how you hired this investigator to find this man because you wanted to help him, your abuser.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of blew me away, Doug. But
It blows a lot of people away.
yeah.
I still get emotional, but I remember I was doing an interview in Toronto in person with a group of people, and I got very tearful. And people thought I was emotional about me. I was actually emotional about Randy, is his name.
Mm-hmm.
I felt terrible for him. As I mentioned earlier, I was 13 when it started. He was only 26. He was just a young man, and I didn't get a lot of information on the story, but I got a little bit, enough to see why he ended up doing what he did. And so there's two rules I live by, and I think everybody should adopt these rules, especially in our current generation. And it's called intellectual objectivity and emotional neutrality. And so I like the idea of using my rationale and my logic to look at my situation and my story and what had happened to me in a more objective, neutral point of view, more as an observer. Because the truth is, you know, you know, I really am this spiritual being, struggling, coping with this human experience. So I try to keep looking at it more from a different perspective, or a third party. People come to me all the time with their problems, and I'm a third party. I'm very neutral, non-judgmental, unconditional, positive regard. I use those tools with myself, and when you look at it that way, we operate from a place of emotion. We operate from a place of reactions. We operate from a place of more and more anger and more hate, and just it's completely unproductive. Again, I think I was lucky that I've been more scientific and analytical and pursuing understanding. It gave me the ability to be objective. And so when I got my birth parent story, my birth mom, birth father story, I got my adoptive parent story, I got a little bit of Randy's story. As I put these stories together, man, oh man, these poor men. And so when I see stories of child abuse, the first thing I go to is the abuser. I wonder what their story is, because I know the victim is going to be okay. they still have an opportunity. Once you get to where this guy got to, and I never found them because these guys go underground, and every once in a while I'll Google and see if I can find. There's 4 of them, and I'll Google their names to see if they surface. But this guy would be, I don't even know if he's alive these days, but um, that's what I just chose because the other way wasn't working.
Right.
Right. I was miserable.
Well, it would have sent you
suffering.
down a very different path, obviously. Yeah.
No question.
We wouldn't be here today talking about this the way we were talking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think luckily I'm a pretty intelligent guy. I always did really well in school if I went. I never did really finish a school year from grade 9 on. So I have intelligence. And so it just didn't make any sense to me to not operate intelligently. Because I'm an intelligent guy. So, and my counselor, her name's Ellen, said, Doug, you're a pretty bright guy. You better approach this with some intellect, your intelligence. Like you're being stupid. She would talk that way,
Just to put
Stop being stupid.
Yeah.
You had mentioned in the book, which I think is a big idea for everyone, that you kind of called it, poison, but there's also beauty within the poison. And it's an idea of looking for the good, which isn't always easy, but it is always there. When did you start doing that? Is that when, because you had mentioned also you kind of had cheated yourself on a better life. Was it when you started changing that perception and you started looking for the good that you found it? Or I guess just with your experience, I'm just curious.
It took a while. Certainly I was exposed to, in the personal development space, you get exposed to the idea of gratitude and looking for the good, leaving people in a better place, impression, increase, these terms that we kind of throw around. So I began practicing that. But honestly, the real turning point was, I got to give credit, Neil Donald Walsh, in one of his books, he called it sieving. He says, not a word, I made it up, but what we do is we really deceive ourselves. He talked about the law of opposites. He said, if there's an idea that comes up, it's positive. He said the universe sets up this contextual field with the idea, and by law, the polar opposite has to be there too. I won't get into the whole sieving conversation, but the way he explained the law of opposite, it was very beautiful and spiritual, but logical at the same time. And I go, I like that approach. And so I just decided, whatever's in my life, in my world, in my head, there's positive, negative. Where do I want to turn to? And I spent most of my life on the negative side, wanting to be on the positive when it was right there. All I had to do was just turn the other cheek, as they say.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. I love that. Because it just came down to a decision. It was a decision at the end of the day that you made.
Yeah. Now, granted, I think when you make enough mistakes, over and over trying to get it right, at some point, hopefully, if you don't lose yourself, I think you say, okay, my way's not working. And for me, it was relationships, naturally. Coming from where I came from, I just was terrible in relationships. Wonderful in business, very ethical, very honest. People always saw me as a very ethical, honest guy, but I wasn't honest in relationships. And it was, I couldn't understand it. Why am I so honest here? And I have a real problem with people that aren't ethical. And I was completely unethical in my relationships. And so after 3 marriages, three attempts, and all of them lasting only about, the first couple only about a year, I always kind of wrecked them around the 1-year mark. Luckily, I had a daughter in my 3rd marriage, and that sustained me, and that commitment sustained me for, a 15-year relationship. But ultimately, still, even knowing what I knew, I still ended up wrecking the last major relationship that I had. And you get to a point where you kind of go, okay, clearly, Doug, your way is not working. You might want to find out what you're doing wrong. And I think we have to humble ourselves. We're in a very ego-driven world of fitting in and conforming and trying to be somebody we're not. I think we really have to drop our egos and have some humility. And this idea of poison, we have all this stuff. I had all this stuff, just jammed down my throat, jammed in my heart and mind that I believed. But there is, I use the peacock story. So a peacock will eat foliage that's actually poisonous, but it makes it its feathers more beautiful, more colorful. And when I saw it, I go, I like that. That's a cool idea.
Yeah.
And
You're a peacock, Doug. I love that.
I'm a peacock, right?
Well, you're certainly a very strong human being, and Kelly and I really appreciate your heart and just again your willingness to come on and share your story. And so now you've kind of turned this, and you're helping people in your situation or situations similar to you. Is that correct with your coaching business?
Yeah, well, listen, this idea of this mistaken identity that we end up with this inaccurate, in my case, I call it the 60% dilemma. So 60% of people watching, listening right now have gone through what they call these adverse experiences. Pretty big number.
Mm-hmm.
And those children grow into adults that struggle, and those adults have children and they raise kids that struggle. And so I'm really wanting to, of course, free the people that have gone through the 60% who are now adults still struggling, and then attempting to raise children. I'm trying to do my best there. But listen, I meet a lot of people who are very successful, and they have a mistaken identity too, because when the parents were raised, and nobody really knows you, not even you. And so a lot of people are just struggling with who they are and who they're not. Our world is perpetuating the idea that you can have anything you want, and people are trying to be somebody they're not. And that's been going on for a long, long, long time, and it's still causing problems. So I want to help anybody that, if you don't like yourself, if you don't feel good about yourself, if generally you're not, calm and relaxed and relatively peaceful most of the time, I believe you have a mistaken identity. Because it's your self-image that runs it runs your thinking, it runs your decision making, it runs your judgments, it runs everything. And so if you don't like your life, you really got to go inside, go, hey, how do I feel about myself? How do I see myself? And where the hell did I get that story?
Mm-hmm.
And then look at the story and go, is that even accurate?
Yeah. It's not based in any reality most of the time.
No. No.
I love the name of your book because we can be mistaken in our identity. I know I was for many years. But the beauty of the identity, the self-image, as you know, and you teach, I'm sure, is that we can recreate that new identity at any time we choose. And it's something that I don't think we're ever done with. Do you? I mean, I think it's something we continue to work on over time.
Yeah, people say I'm working on my self-image. I go, stop it. They say I've got to fix my self-image. I go, no, what you have to do is you have to get rid of the things that you picked up along the way that aren't really true. Mm-hmm. You can't just make up some identity. You have to get rid of the things that aren't true. I don't think you have to dredge your past up or anything like that, but there I do it in the book. The way the book is built, the book is a process, and I take you through these steps where I first stage is learn what is your mistaken identity, how did you get it, what is yours, and then the second phase is unlearn. So let's get rid of all that crap. Mm-hmm. And then when you clear up your identity, you're left standing at the last part of the book, which is to relearn and start to relearn actual truth about who you are and who you're not. And you kind of land where you kind of go, oh, so this is who I am.
Yes. This is
all of a sudden you calm down.
Yeah.
You just kind of go,
oh. I think when you're talking about as you're upgrading your identity based on removing those false assumptions or the things that aren't true, it removes a word somewhat that is pretty prevalent today in our society that you talked about regarding mental wellness, and the word is anxiety. And I love your definition of it. I would love for you to share that right now.
Well, I'll tell you a real quick story. I was suffering from a potential medical problem. Of course, made a bunch of drama up. It wasn't what I thought it was. 4:00 in the morning, I'm running an event in Toronto with Bob Proctor I'm working with. I knew Bob would get up early. I sent him a message, and Bob, can we talk? And I get on the phone, and I'm rattling stuff off, and I'm really anxious, Bob. He goes, Doug, all anxiety is fear of the future. I go on and on and on. I go, I'm really, really frustrated.
Sounds like
Doug. Yeah. Frustration simply means your expectations aren't being met. And so what I learned in my work, and I give a lot of credit to Bob, of course, and Bob pointing me to which I think should be the only book that people read these days on how to think properly and get rid of your mental health problems, and that is Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about your mind as this machine. And we've been taught to worry about the future because that's all anxiety is. All anxiety is you're worrying about something that might happen, or you're worrying about something bad that happened before it's going to happen again.
Hmm.
And you control your thinking. And if you have frustration and resentment and anger, well, then that's all something from the past, which means you're focusing on the past. So if you have negative emotions, anxiety and fear and doubt and worry, you're thinking about your future when you shouldn't be. If you're dealing with negative emotions, resentment, guilt, shame, that's all in the past. So we have to train ourselves to not be looking too far out in the future. We have the ability to predict our future and we can see what we want for the future, but you should not be wasting any time trying to control it. That's going to make you anxious.
Hmm.
We have to
Yeah,
learn
no
to
doubt.
do that. That's how our mind works. So I just learned how to operate it properly. And now I try to teach people, we were on a call this morning and somebody said, I'm really worried about this. I said, I think you're a little too far out in the future.
Yeah.
You're thinking about something 3 weeks from now.
That you have no control over. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to end. We ask all of our guests what forgiveness means to them. But you had said something in your book that really caught my attention. You said you were able to forgive yourself when you went to the one. You want to speak about that in regards to your idea of forgiveness?
Well, yeah. So I heard a couple things before I heard the last thing I'll share, but I was hearing that true forgiveness is forgetting, which meant, don't bring up the past. And I wasn't, wasn't brought up with any religion. I didn't really go to church and like that. I didn't really believe in God, but a friend of mine introduced me to God and said, you should probably maybe get to know this guy. And so I started that relationship up. And as I was learning about different things in theology, this idea was presented to me. It was in a movie. And the idea was that, this is the old, this is the new, and you are forgiven. And my son paid for your forgiveness with his blood. And I kind of liked that idea, the simplicity of it. I said, okay, I'll go with that. I just accepted it, right? And I was talking to somebody today. They said, I'm trying to forgive myself. I said, you're actually not supposed to be forgiving yourself. You're trying, it's not you to forgive yourself. You just have to accept the forgiveness that's already been granted to you.
There you go.
And
yes,
that's so much easier than trying to forgive yourself. Like, stop trying to forgive yourself. How about you just accept forgiveness? Because if your father, if you did something wrong and you came to your father or your mother, they'd say, Doug, you're forgiven. It's okay. You wouldn't carry around for 40 years trying to forgive yourself. You were forgiven. So I like that idea. That's much easier. And that's the place to go for forgiveness. You're not going to get it from anybody else. And I wouldn't pursue it to get it from yourself. Just accept the forgiveness that's been offered.
That's great.
Doug, thank you so much for teaching and inspiring our audience today on how to forgive, but more importantly, how to live a life of freedom.
That concludes 30 minutes of forgiveness with Doug Dane. Make sure that you check out his book, Mistaken Identity.
And don't forget to join us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. We'll see you next time on Time for Forgiveness.